Good morning, Bethel AME. First off, happy 184th anniversary. Please give yourselves a hand for that accomplishment. That's amazing. You've really come this far by faith. Thank you so much to the pastors, the ministers, and the entire Bethel family for just inviting me to share in this illustrious celebration. I am just so humbled and honored. I'm also really grateful to see my family and my colleagues that have come out to support me. I'm not going to prolong the time any longer. Let's just say a quick word of prayer as we begin. Dear gracious and eternal Father, before we ask for anything, we first want to say thank you for everything. We thank you, Lord, for waking us up this morning. We thank you that last night wasn't our last night. And Lord, we thank you for Bethel and its 184 years of black empowerment, civil rights, educational advancement, and the preaching and teaching of your holy word. Lord, you brought them through slavery, a Great Depression, Jim Crow, recession, and a pandemic. And if you can bring them through that, Lord, I also ask that you bring them through another 184 years and beyond. Continue to sustain them and reassure them and encourage them to keep pressing on. And Lord, while I may not be preaching a sermon, I ask that the research I share will still lead someone to you somehow. Let the history shared make someone realize that you are faithful through generations and that you will never stop being faithful. Let someone understand that if you can carry churches through centuries and generations, that you can also be their sustainer and carry them through life. And Lord, we ask these things in the marvelous, matchless, and majestic name of Jesus Christ. Everyone said amen. All right, so today I want to share with you my research project called More Than Sunday, the Social Service Initiatives of Black Churches in Detroit. And so this was a project that I did for my Detroit history class at the University of Michigan in the fall of 2024. It was originally an online historic interactive map, but this is the presentation version. It's condensed. And so before diving in, I want to begin with two quotes from someone I deeply admire, Jamon Jordan. I'm sure many of us have heard of him. He's Detroit's official historian and a University of Michigan professor. And so these quotes, they perfectly set the tone for what this project is about. And so one says, "There is no way to accurately discuss Detroit's black history, especially as it regards the black freedom struggle, without a deep dive into the faith institutions in Detroit's black community." And here's another quote from him of May of 2017. It says, "You cannot divorce Detroit's black history from Detroit's black church history. They not only built the black community in Detroit, they changed and radicalized black religion everywhere." That deserves like a poetry snap. That I can quote Jamon Jordan all day. And I just couldn't agree more with these quotes. The African American church, it's the most vital, powerful, and enduring black institution in America. Much of black movements, our culture, our history is preserved, nurtured, and impacted within its black churches. And under the restrictive Jim Crow laws and segregation, black churches become important sanctuaries offering refuge from the hostility of racist white communities. Therefore, at one time, the black church was the epicenter and the lifeline of the black community and was almost literally all that we had. And so this project, it aims to show how the black church's outreach reaches far beyond the bounds of Sunday morning worship services like this, Bible studies, or prayer meetings. Basically how the black church serves the community beyond its spiritual needs. It shows years of research I have done from both digital and physical archives, and it also reflects interviews with key figures like the stellar award-winning gospel announcer, Dr. Deborah Smith Pollard, Reverend Lee Jackson of Cathedral of Faith, and Daniel Baxter of the Dr. Oso and Sweet Foundation. And you will see how 9 of Detroit's unsung and prominent black congregations, such as yourselves, have helped past generations of black Detroiters through social service initiatives. And I also want to challenge that false narrative that is circling online that dismisses the black church's impact. The history you will see here tells a very different and true story. In the famous words of Baptist preachers, I won't be before you long, but let's see how that goes, because I'm covering 9 congregations, and they're in the order of when they were founded. So the historic Second Baptist Church of Greektown, Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME for short, Hartford Memorial Baptist Church, Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, the historic King Solomon Missionary Baptist Church, Cathedral of Faith, the historic New Bethel, historic Little Rock, and Shrine of the Black Madonna. And when I say Shrine of the Black Madonna, I mean Shrine number 1 here in Detroit. I will be covering Bethel AME first, since this is your anniversary. So feel free to take pictures of the slides, as I will be going through some of them quickly. And for those at home watching, please feel free to screenshot. I want to be mindful of your time. All right, so Bethel AME. And a lot of these slides the pictures that you see in these slides are my pictures that I have taken. So Bethel AME is Detroit's second oldest black church in Detroit. Bethel's roots can be traced back to 1839, when you all were originally called the Colored Methodist Society. Now I'm going to say CMS for short from now on. And they were supporters of the Underground Railroad. Now, when this group was first organized, they didn't have a building to worship in, so they asked the city council to use a building called Military Hall for their meeting place. And so this request was granted on July 9th, 1839, and 2 weeks later, the Military Hall was given to the CMS group. And from this point on, there's a lot of moving to several places. I'm not going to cover all of that. But one structure was moved to Crojan and Hastings Street. So think of where Second Baptist Church is, the present building that is there now. It was about 2 blocks away from Second. And you know Crojan Street is now called Monroe Street. And of course, a lot of Hastings Street was eaten up by the expressway, I-375. And so it was in this building that the CMS group became governed under the African Methodist Episcopal denomination. And so that took place on May 10th, 1841. And here's a more clearer picture of that top left illustration of your first building that's on Lafayette, which I'm getting ready to get into further. And so on September 19th, 1847, you all dedicated your first building, which was constructed from the ground up. From this point, you all will build all your future facilities from the ground up, which is a huge accomplishment. To ensure stability, you all will obtain incorporation on July 30th of 1849. Now, this second edifice of Bethel was at Napoleon and Hastings, so this is in the Paradise Valley area. This time, the building costs about $21,000, which is around $532,000 in today's money. The building is pictured on the top right, and James Henderson was the pastor of Bethel at the time, and Mr. Darwin Curry told me that he was the builder of that edifice. He's the historiographer for the AME Church, 2nd District. So also James Henderson is the father of Cornelius Henderson. Cornelius Henderson was a U of M grad, go blue, but he was also an African-American civil engineer known for his work on the Ambassador Bridge. So that family had a legacy of building, and eventually he would become pastor of Ebenezer AME Church, which, speaking of, Ebenezer AME Church also comes out of Bethel. What I love about this is that it wasn't a bitter thing. As one of your histories mentioned, there was no split, no confusion, and no rebellion against authority. Instead, Ebenezer was founded out of accommodation. The pastor of Bethel at the time wanted an alternative church home for some of his congregants who had to travel to church on muddy roads and swamps. And keep in mind, this was early Detroit, so it's before the automobiles and the Motor City. And so I want to turn your attention further to this Paradise Valley location. As you can see in this picture, there was a social service building at this location. And so Reverend Joseph Gomez, he's one of the previous pastors of Bethel AME Church. His daughter wrote a book about his life. The book is called In Darkness with God, and in this book she writes about this social service building. Fitting into this theme of social service, a couple of pages before that, before she talks about the building, she says, the church became the most significant force in the black community in terms of the religious, social, and political lives of the people. And so here's an excerpt from the book that talks about that building and a close-up picture of the social service building that's also in the book. I just love how it says that it provided Southern migrants with housing and employment placing. We can even see at the end of that quote that Charles Diggs Sr., who was the first African-American Democrat elected to the Senate of the state of Michigan, received help at the Bethel Social Service Building. And so Reverend Gomez, he was also the pastor who led Bethel into building that massive St. Antoine building at 585 Frederick. Okay, it was called Greater Bethel at the time. And the ground for this was broken on November 11th, 1923. Then the cornerstone was laid on April 27th, 1924, and the building was completed on June 7th, 1925. And so next month will actually mark the 100th anniversary of its completion. And so, of course, there was some opposition to this building being built. According to the In the Darkness book that I just showed you, when these expansion plans were announced, the Ku Klux Klan had burnt crosses that were in front of the Napoleon and Hastings Street locations. And so threats were made to Reverend Gomez and his family. One phone call was made to them that says that, they gave them 24 hours to leave the city of Detroit. Once again, okay, this is a long quote, I'm not going to read that. But I just love this excerpt from the book because it really captures this celebratory atmosphere and the aesthetic of that day. Unfortunately, there were still racist white people who didn't want the church built, and they were shouting harsh things at this celebration. However, it still prevailed. And here's a picture from the Cornerstone Lane that you all had, the service for that. And here's a picture that I own of the St. Antoine location. It was very intricate and beautiful. And so when Bethel was at this location, let's take a closer look at this, the Great Depression leadership that took place under Reverend William Peck. Also, if you didn't know, Peck Park, which is 2 blocks away from here, is named after him. So Reverend William H. Peck, he and his wife Fanny, they launched key initiatives in 1930 to support the black community during the Great Depression. Reverend Peck, he founded the Booker T. Washington Trade Association, which is now the Booker T. Washington Business Association, to support black businesses during the Great Depression. While Mrs. Peck, she established the Housewives League of Detroit to encourage black patronage. You know how everyone now is boycotting Target and Walmart and Amazon due to their rollback of DEI initiatives? So there was just recently a whole economic blackout just a couple of months ago. Well, the Housewives League was already doing this nearly a century ago. Bethel was already doing this, not buying from places that were not for us and supporting and advertising black businesses instead. There were chapters of this league across the nation. And Bethel also had its own insurance company called Bethel Benefit to address the economic challenges faced by black Detroiters during the Great Depression. Bethel also had the first black state charter credit union in the United States. It was called the Fannie B. Peck Credit Union, and it was dissolved in November of 2015, but it served this community for 79 years. That is amazing. So here's a picture I took of the Booker T. Washington Business Association logo. That's on your left, right-hand side. It's on the East Grand Boulevard, and this is also a balance sheet that comes from the 100th anniversary souvenir booklet of Bethel Benefit. And here's some more background information about the Fannie B. Peck Credit Union, its history. You can find these advertisements in Bethel Booster. That's an old newsletter for Bethel. Bethel also had an active sports ministry with a basketball team, a tennis team, and a bowling team. And also, did you know, I'm sure many of you do, that Berry Gordy Sr., the father of Motown's founder, Berry Gordy Jr., was a member of Bethel. And if you look closely at this Fannie B. Peck Credit Union in the souvenir booklet, you can see the Gordy family is just scattered throughout here. A young Berry Gordy is on the right. You can see him, as well as Esther Gordy, who was the founder of the Motown Museum. And so here's a picture of some souvenir booklet advertisements from Berry Gordy Sr.'s company. I had to check in with one of my colleagues at the Motown Museum to ask which Gordy it was, because I know that Berry Gordy Jr. had businesses before Motown, and he told me that it was Berry Gordy Sr. And so, unfortunately, decades later, the city had plans to build a boulevard that would cut right through this massive sanctuary that was on St. Antoine. That wasn't a coincidence. This led to the demolition of this 1925 edifice. And so Bethel, you all chose to stay in the community and to rebuild. And that boulevard, the Detroit plan to build, never happened. And out of all the church histories that I have read, I have to say that this has made me the most angry. Before urban renewal led to the demolition of your previous facility, you all had made plans to build an education building. And so the funds for this were used to build the sanctuary that we are sitting in today. Also, just recently, remains of the basement wall and flooring were found of this St. Antoine building. And so once again, here's a picture of that proposed education center. And I understand why a building like this was needed, because at one time the Sunday school at Bethel had over 66 Sunday school teachers and over 1,000 students. And so here are some pictures that I took of the remains of Bethel AME's previous building in August of 2023. As I mentioned before, that boulevard never got built, and eventually, I'm not sure of the time frame, this land was sold to a black developer. And during site excavation, the construction crew discovered surviving remains. As you can see, the brick wall and the basement flooring from this former building. So he stopped everything and he held an event to commemorate this history. And I went to it, and I walked in the processional from your current site to your past site. It took about 2 to 4 minutes to walk over there. I was so shocked because where you all used to be is not at all far from where you are now. But however, there was a blessing that came out of this. You all moved here in 1974 and built this beautiful complex at a cost of $1.5 million. However, it does seat 1,700 fewer people than the old building did, but it's a ranch church, so everything is on one floor instead of having a balcony or stairs. You all were handicap accessible before it was even mandated for buildings to be. And it is also designed by the prominent black architect Nathan Johnson. And some of these other churches that you will see in my presentation were designed by him as well. And so this picture I have with him, it was back in 2019. It was an event with Doko Momo and Noir Design Party. Karen Burton is one of the co-founders of Noir Design Party. She's here. And I went to this event in 2019, and it was a lecture and a tour of Bethel AME. He was in attendance. I believe he was 94 at the time. And after this, I went up and met him, and that's Reverend Jarrett, and that's my mom, Sandra Little. And after this picture, I was talking to somebody, I forgot, and he put his hand on my shoulders, and I turned around, and he was like, "So you want to be an architect?" And I was a little confused as to how he knew that, because at the time I wanted to be an architect and a pastor, but that's another story for another day. And it's all a blur as to what I said, but I was really just grateful to have met him before he passed away in 2021. And so you all are just literally worshiping in a sculpture, okay? Nathan Johnson was showing out with this design. It's in the shape of an African hunt to reflect our African roots. I remember during the lecture at the event, Minister Marcel Todd, he shared some interesting facts about Bethel. There are 3 steps that lead up to the stage to represent Christ's resurrection from the grave. The lighting is designed to match the cozy atmosphere, and the roof used to be copper. However, the entire complex for Bethel AME was never completed. As you can see from this architectural rendering, there's no chapel, there's no reflecting pool, no gymnasium, or a courtyard, anything like that. The chapel is actually supposed to run right down this middle aisle where you see that memorial tree thing. That was where the doors were going to be. And so after this event, Minister Todd also took me into the Brooks Chapel Hall and showed me this. The same wood paneling that is from the old St. Antoine building is also in this building. So I thought that was really, really cool. So referring back to the conversation of Bethel AME and urban renewal, Detroit had a housing shortage that was driven by freeway construction and suburban migration. So with a $400,000 HUD loan, Bethel's nonprofit housing corporation built Bethel Towers and Townhouses. It's a 120-unit apartment building and 26 townhouses. And so here are some pictures I took of Bethel's housing from 2023. It is now the St. Antoine Gardens housing. All right, so now we're moving on to Second Baptist Church. So when talking about black church history in the city of Detroit, I would be remiss not to mention the historic Second Baptist Church. So this congregation was founded by 13 black individuals in 1836. It's the oldest black church in the city of Detroit in the state of Michigan. Matter of fact, before Michigan even became a state, Second Baptist was already founded. Second Baptist is one of the oldest black churches in the Midwest. The reason Second Baptist was established was because of discrimination that was happening at First Baptist Church. You can see that building on the top left-hand corner. At First Baptist, black congregants weren't allowed to have any leadership roles. You can see this same discriminatory technique being the reason for a lot of historic black congregations being founded. I mean, doesn't this sound familiar to why Richard Allen even created the AME denomination? So much history has taken place in this 189-year history of this church. I cannot tell it all in the slide presentation. It became a vital center for abolition. I mean, take a look at these statistics. It hosted Underground Railroad activities. It freed over 5,000 enslaved people. And Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and Martin Luther King Jr. have all spoken at Second Baptist. But however, I want to focus more specifically on what social service initiatives the church accomplished under the leadership of its 19th pastor. So this is the Reverend Robert Bradby, and he served from the years 1910 to 1946. And so during the Great Migration, committees from Second Baptist would meet Southern newcomers at the Michigan Central train station, the newly renovated one. I mean, it's now newly renovated now, but that's the one I'm referring to. And so different committees were appointed to meet different trains. And so these committees, they maintained a 24-hour schedule and would direct or deliver them to where their friends or families lived. Now, they would offer assistance in the name of the church. Say if some Southern newcomer from the South didn't have family or friends and didn't have much money, Second would let them sleep at the church until they found housing. And during the Great Migration, many white and native black Detroiters looked down on Southern newcomers unfamiliar with the local social norms. And so Second Baptist helped migrants adapt to this by creating over 35 ministries that are focused on employment, hygiene, attire, and education. Of course, we cannot forget about the black women who are the backbone of the black church. Shout out to the black women in this sanctuary today. Reverend Bradby had a vision, but it was the black women who supported it. And they founded initiatives like the Big Sisters Auxiliary, who created a settlement house for black women migrants during the Great Migration. They also established the Detroit Study Club, which was created to promote black women's social advancement. I want to circle back to Second Baptist helping migrants get jobs. Reverend Bradby, he had a very close relationship with Henry Ford. He had like a personal pass to all the Ford factories. So he was able to secure jobs for black migrants at Ford Motor Company for nearly 3 decades. He wrote a letter of recommendation, which basically led to the guaranteed employment. This boosted Second Baptist membership and established the church as an informal job hub for black migrants. And in 1940, the Second Baptist Church Credit Union was organized, and you can see their logo here and their slogan, which is not for profit, not for charity, but for service. Second Baptist is also very involved in civil rights support. Here we can see the legacy of civil rights. In 1956, Second contribute, in an equivalent to today's money, that's $30,000 to Dr. Martin Luther King's Montgomery Improvement Association. And this was more than any church in the U.S. On September 13th, 1925, Second hosted an NAACP Detroit chapter meeting to rally support for Dr. Oswin Sweet. And this September will mark the 100th anniversary of the Dr. Sweet incident. As I heard one pastor say, the Baptist church has multiplied by division. And we can most definitely see this here. So here's the family tree of Second Baptist. Over 30 churches have come out of Second, including some that are in Canada. And 3 of the Detroit ones are in this map. So really quickly, moving on to the extension of Second Baptist is the Baptist Christian Center. And so education, as we see today, the teacher appreciation, education has long been a marker of social status, and Second Baptist advanced class and respectability for black migrants through initiatives like the Baptist Christian Center. It was founded by Reverend Bradby and later renamed the Henry C. Gleiss Memorial Center. And so you can see a sandbar map of where the school once stood. And so here are the pictures of the students in certain classes. This is the class in domestic science. This is the cooking class. And this is the graduation of the Christian culture class of the Christian Center. Here's a more recent picture I took of Second Baptist. Second Baptist Church was the first 2-story church among black people in the city of Detroit. As you can see to the right, that is their education center, and it used to be called the Banks Memorial Building, I believe. And this is also designed by Nathan Johnson, the same architect who designed your beautiful facility. All right, moving on to Hartford Memorial. This was founded on May 27th, 1917, and it's made up of Second Baptist Church members. And it was located on what is now known as the Old West Side. And so Hartford was originally called the Institutional Baptist Church. It was founded by Reverend Edgar Wendell Edwards. He was the founding pastor, and after he left, Reverend Charles Hill took over, and he renamed it Hartford Avenue. And so Reverend Hill was a bold advocate for workers' rights, supporting unions despite its controversy. In the 1930s, he helped unionize Dodge, Chrysler, and Packard plants, and played a key role in unionizing the Ford Motor Company. Hartford also played a key role in advocating for black families during the Sojourner Truth housing project that was the battle that happened in the 1940s. And this was supported by Thurgood Marshall and President Roosevelt. Eventually, this would contribute to the 1943 Detroit race riot. And so that's a picture of Reverend Hill at the bottom. Reverend Charles Adams became Hartford's pastor in 1969 and relocated this church to its current site on James Cousin Freeway. This is in 1977. This was also when the name changed from Hartford Avenue to now Hartford Memorial Baptist Church. And so under his leadership, he created a credit union in 1979, growing its assets to $2.5 million. And in 1982, the Hartford Agape House was created to serve Metro Detroit residents, offering support such as food assistance, clothing, medical care, legal referrals, and just so much more, scholarships. And in 1986, Reverend Charles Adams was the Detroit branch NAACP president, and he called for a boycott against Dearborn businesses. This almost put Fairlane into bankruptcy. Dearborn didn't want to follow through on an agreement that they made to allow non-residents to use their city parks. And so if a non-resident used any of Dearborn's 39 parks, they would be fined $500 or sentenced to 90 days in jail. So, you know, Dearborn was just notoriously racist. And so this is what led to the boycott at the Fairlane town. And so here is the many outreach services of the Agape House, again, and the logo for it and its location. And here are some newspaper clippings that talks about that boycott. In 2017, Hartford Village Commons, a partnership with the Presbyterian Villages, was established as an 84-unit gated community for seniors that were aged 62 and older. And so in the 1980s and the early 1990s, Hartford raised over $500,000 to acquire and develop land among 7 Mile and James Cousin. And so this property was leased to businesses like Super Kmart, that don't even exist no more, and black-owned franchises including McDonald's and KFC, helping revitalize the neighborhood. And other tenants included Total Armed Security, Steve's Soul Food, Subway, and Checkers. And so in 1998, Hartford leased its property to Super Kmart, Detroit's first major department store since the 1970s, which became the nation's top performing Kmart before closing due to bankruptcy. And so in 2003, the site was leased to Home Depot, and it brought 600 jobs and tax revenue to this city. And so here are some Google Street screenshots of these companies. And so when you go down this entire 7 Mile neighborhood, you can literally see Hartford and Greater Grace's impact on the community. They own a lot of buildings, and Reverend Adams got the idea from the family of Dr. King in Atlanta. And so Hartford also had a strong athletic ministry where there were teams of baseball, basketball, golf, softball, and cheerleading teams. Okay, we're moving on to Tabernacle. Y'all still hanging in there with me? All right, all right. I know this is a lot of history thrown at you. And so Tabernacle was founded November 15th in 1920, where there were families from Georgia that gathered at a home on the east side of Detroit. Reverend Major James Morris was the founder. In 1921, some former dissatisfied Hartford Avenue members joined this Tabernacle East Side congregation, and they offered to build a church on Detroit's west side, so the old west side. And so together they established Tabernacle Baptist Church on the west side. Once again, yeah, this is an old west side area. You can see that first church in the top left-hand corner. It was Reverend Pittman who had moved them to 6125 Beechwood. That is the location you see on the bottom left. And so in April of 1952, Dr. Jesse J. McNeil and his wife launched the Tabernacle Neighborhood House Nursery to meet the community's need for early childhood education. It was renamed the Tabernacle Child Development Center in the 1980s due to high demand. In 1969, Reverend Fulton O'Bradley established a scholarship committee to support youth with financial barriers to higher education and provide career guidance. And I'm just so proud to be a recipient of the 2024 Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church Scholarship. They helped me with my first year at U of M, so they all right with me. Tabernacle's recreational programs began under Reverend Robert Pittman and expanded under Dr. Sampson. And so that was basketball, tennis, skating, and women's softball. The church also offered a Meals on Wheels ministry, job placement program, and counselor center. Also, Dr. Sampson was known to be a great teacher of God's word. Reverend Nathan Johnson is the current pastor of Tabernacle, and he led the church to build their massive edifice on West Grand Boulevard. Moving on to King Solomon Missionary Baptist Church on 14th Street. Today, they are actually celebrating 99 years. King Solomon was founded on May 16th, 1926 by Reverend Moses Williams. He was the previous pastor of the historic St. James Missionary Baptist Church. St. James will become this gospel music landmark right in the future. Reverend Charles Nix and the St. James Choir will produce many albums. But anyway, King Solomon's first location was in Detroit's Black Bottom, as you can see in this Sanborn map pictured on the left. The congregation grew after merging with Mount Nebo Baptist Church, and despite several relocations, the church found its permanent home in 9244 Del Mar in 1941. So that is the picture on the right, and today it is now the Pentecostal Christian Academy of the Pentecostal Church of God congregation. After the death of Reverend Moses in 1931, 6 pastors led the church until Reverend Dr. Theodore Sylvester Bone became the 7th pastor on March 13th, 1944. And so it was under his leadership that the church experienced significant growth. In 1951, Reverend Bone moved King Solomon Baptist Church to its current location at 6100 and 6125 14th Street, Detroit, purchasing the property from Temple Baptist Church for $353,000. That's equivalent to about $4.2 million today. It was the largest venue owned by black people at the time. And so here's a picture of that Del Mar Street location. It used to be an old synagogue, and when King Solomon owned it, they had a business corner. You can see that on the right. They owned 6 stores that exemplified the church's support for black patronage. So here's a picture of the 2 buildings that King Solomon owns on 14th Street. Currently, the Recreation and Educational Center is abandoned, but there are plans for its fundraising and restoration. And speaking of this recreation and education building of King Solomon, there was an article published in the Detroit Tribune at the time that highlighted the many amenities of this building when it was called the Education and Community Activity Center. It was said that it had the pastor's library, 3 conference rooms, 75 classrooms, 5 ladies' lounges, 2 dining rooms, 2 men's lounges, 2 kitchens, a gymnasium, a boxing gym, and a chapel. Known later is the 14th Marquette Community Center. It opened in 1954, and it offered programs for all races, including music, art, dramatic, and citizenship classes. It also had a clinic, day nursery, and hosted events like table tennis, roller skating, and Halloween parties. And so in the 1960s, poet Margaret Danner founded the Boone House, or the Boone House, a cultural center that attracted poets like the Langston Hughes. It offered courses in dance, French, college prep, and poetry. And so this was in response to some school cutbacks that were happening. And so King Solomon also had a recreational program that thrived with a gym where boxer Thomas Hearns trained. The church produced Olympic medalists, Ronnie Harris and others. King Solomon had 10 finalists in the Golden Gloves with 7 winning. This is King Solomon's settlement house. It was on West Grand Boulevard. And the Detroit Tribune article mentions that it featured a dormitory, a dining hall, a chapel, club rooms, and offices. And so that is that article. And so when King Solomon owned this 5,000-seat auditorium, it became a key civil rights venue. And so in 1954, Thurgood Marshall spoke there after his Brown versus Board of Education victory. King Solomon hosted a 24-hour Operation Justice event to protest the killing of Emmett Till. So Mamie Till and her father, John Carthen, spoke at this rally. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke here twice. Malcolm X delivered his fiery ballot or the bullet speech. And King Solomon also has a rich gospel music legacy. Reverend James Cleveland performed here with his singers in 1965, and the Gospel Music Workshop of America was founded at King Solomon. Berry Gordy discovered the Supremes here, And King Solomon also used to own a credit union and dry cleaners, according to its current pastor. So that's the newspaper article about the Operation Justice Emmett Till event. And this is the Gospel Music Workshop of America founding articles. And here's a packed out auditorium of King Solomon when the staple singers came and sung. This is the Cathedral of Faith. This one really shocked me. It has its origins in Inkster, Michigan in 1930. It was originally called the Peace and Harmony Baptist Church, and Reverend A.J. Oliver was the founding pastor. And so fast forward down to 1963, Reverend Dr. Jackson Herbert Hinkle became pastor. And so he played a role in the historic Little Rock school desegregation case. And he contributed to the founding of Operation Breadbasket in Chicago alongside Reverend Jesse Jackson. So Reverend Hinkle, he renamed the church Cathedral of Faith, and he transitioned it to a non-denominational congregation. When Reverend Dr. Hinkle became pastor, the congregation outgrew that William Street auditorium that we just saw. And he purchased 9.5 acres of land at 2727 Inkster Road and Michigan Avenue. This site would become Cathedral City. It had an elegant sanctuary that the church's history describes as a replica of a biblically described temple. Several additional buildings, both on this site and elsewhere, were constructed to support Dr. Hinkle's visionary Womb to Tomb program. And so this Womb to Tomb program, right, had literally things for birth to death. And we see the academy, and we see the college, the Bible Institute, the funeral home, and a cemetery that they owned in Belleville. So here's that rendering again of Cathedral City in Inkster. And so these are the plenty of social service initiatives of Cathedral of Faith. It's a lot of them. They range from libraries and a bookstore, a flower shop, a co-op, a drug program, a car wash, a television ministry, and even helicopter rides for children over the city of Inkster. And so Cathedral of Faith also had a transportation system with 15 buses. At one point, this surpassed Inkster's own transportation system. It brought members from Detroit, Willow Run, Ypsilanti, Romulus, and Wayne. And so by 1976, it hosted one of the nation's largest black Sunday schools with over 3,749 attendants in one Sunday. This is that picture of that cathedral that was in Inkster. Unfortunately, that cathedral did burn down, and the church relocated to Burt Road in Detroit, and where elements of that Womb to Tomb program and other ministries continued. And so this is the picture of the church today. These are the books that Reverend Hinkle wrote that I'm getting a lot of my information from. This is some of the vinyl records from the church that I own. From the vinyl records that I own. And this is the Cathedral Choir, 90-voice choir that went to the White House. And they sung for a dinner during President Nixon's term. Cathedral of Faith also had a swimming pool. I thought that was really cool. And so this is where the Inkster Cathedral City site looks like today. Moving on to New Bethel. This is the site where Aretha Franklin got her musical career and her training. So New Bethel was founded on March 6, 1934 in Detroit. It was first called the Helping Hands Society, and then it was changed to New Bethel Baptist Church by a gentleman by the name of Henderson. That's his last name. And so in 1946, the renowned Reverend C.L. Franklin became pastor. And so he relocated the church to this old bowling alley. You can see it on the bottom left-hand corner. It was on 4210 Hastings Street. In today's money, it would cost over $3 million to renovate that. And they converted it into their worship space. And they were only in this space for 10 years until the freeway came. So then Reverend C.L. led them to their $500,000 renovation of an abandoned theater and transformed it into their worship space. And so Nathan Johnson was the architect who did that renovation as well, the same one who did Bethel AME. However, when New Bethel was in Black Bottom, the church provided food, clothing, and scholarships to the community. And so New Bethel also played a pivotal role in the historic March on Freedom down Woodward Avenue. Here's a picture of that. And also, fun fact, Reverend C.L. Franklin was good friends with Reverend Hinkle, the one I just covered. After Reverend Franklin's passing in 1984, Reverend Robert Smith became pastor and remains so today. And so in 1983, the church opened 2 federally supported emergency relief centers, assisting over 400 people weekly. You can see both emergency relief centers at the bottom. And so this ad comes from the Detroit Free Press showcasing their many social service initiatives. Reverend Smith also introduced Bank Day to promote Black-owned businesses. Here's a picture of some of the other programs that they had. And New Bethel also had the Rehoboth Apartments, which are located across the street from the sanctuary. It was a 31-unit complex, and so Reverend Smith founded the New Bethel Redeemer Development Corporation to enhance affordable housing in the Linwood community. All right, just 2 more. Hang in there with me, please. This is Little Rock Missionary Baptist Church. It was founded in April 1936 under Reverend Robert E. Tate, and they relocated to multiple times to different locations. One of them is at the top left-hand corner. And after Reverend Tate's passing, Reverend Jim Holly assumed the church role of a pastor in 1972. And so under his leadership, the church thrived and moved its iconic neo-Gothic building to Warren Avenue. And so Reverend Holly, he established the Country Preacher Foods, a minority-owned food distributor. And they had partnerships with Rite Aid and Better Made, and they provided 17,000 cookies to Northwest Airlines. I really want to try one. Here is the picture of the containers that Country Preacher's products would come in. Little Rock sponsored youth trips and historical landmarks to HBCUs. They owned the Detroit Academy of Arts and Sciences. That's a charter school that they had with 2 campuses. They also had an Education in the Hood program where adults could earn associate's degrees on site via Wayne County Community College. The church launched initiatives like the Shoes for Children project, which provided thousands of shoes annually, and the Little Rock Food Pantry, which distributes food year-round. They also had a Family Life Center. It was leased from the city of Detroit in 2006, and it serves as North End's only recreational center. And so Reverend Jim Holly, they also have the Rock Plaza too, can't forget about that. That's a strip mall. And Reverend Holly, he retired in 2022 after 50 years of leadership. And so Reverend Hinkle and Reverend Holly were also good friends. And so here's an ad from Little Rock that shows all of these community-based projects. And here is a flyer, a brochure that talks about the Family Life Center and shows all the activities that took place there, such as swimming and basketball. After I attended a service in Little Rock, I walked just down Woodward Avenue and just saw how much they had impacted that area. And so here are some of the pictures that I had took. That's a plaza, that's the Job Placement Center, and that's the new Jim Holly residencies. Last church, the Shrine of the Black Madonna, last but not least. The Shrine of the Black Madonna, shrine number 1, traces its origins to 1951, when Dr. Albert Clegg Sr., his brother Henry Clegg, and others founded St. Mark's Presbyterian Church on 12th and Atkinson. If you have ever been at this location, if you've been to the congregation, that is where St. Mark's was at. And so Reverend Albert Clegg became pastor, but he was dismissed 2 years later due to his activism. He and many members, including Dr. Clegg Sr., left to establish Central Congregational Church. It was later renamed the Shrine of the Black Madonna in 1970. Shrines were also located at Mack and Burns, Wyoming at 7 Mile, and in Atlanta, Georgia, and Houston, Texas. So here's a picture showing that. And under Reverend Clegg's leadership, the Shrine Cultural Center and Bookstore was established with branches in Atlanta and Houston. These stores sold African art, apparel, books, and much more while hosting cultural events. The Shrine also had a law center that was at Wyoming Avenue and offered legal aid and seminars to support disadvantaged communities. And so here is that brochure for the law center. And George Crockett Jr. was actually on the advisory board. Reverend Clegg also envisioned Beulah Land Farm in South Carolina as a self-sustaining sanctuary for Black people. In 1999, the Shrine of the Black Madonna acquired nearly 4,000 acres, making it one of the largest Black-owned and Black church-owned rural properties in the U.S. And so this is the reflection. The project reflects how Detroit's Black churches were never just places of worship. They were centers of education, economic power, social service, and community defense. And so by tracing the stories of these 9 congregations, it's clear that the Black church has always been a force for justice and uplift, a legacy worth remembering, a legacy worth celebrating. And if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, please remember this really quickly. Nearly everything that you saw today came from church bulletins, newsletters, souvenir booklets, rare photos, full church histories, dissertations, and magazines. These everyday materials are treasures. If you have any of these from Bethel AME or any other Black church you've belonged to or visited, please, please, please do not throw them away. Preserve them. Tell your children and grandchildren why they matter. There's an African proverb that says, when an old man dies, a library burns to the ground. Prioritizing the documentation of Black religious history is important and powerful because it affirms that Black history matters. So when our elders pass away and their stories go unrecorded, or when these church documents are lost or tossed, we lose a piece of our history. These libraries are irreplaceable, and the unique stories and archives they hold are gone forever. Preservation is crucial because it helps people, especially my generation, find inspiration from great Black religious leaders of the past. So I'll say it again, do not throw your stuff out. If you're willing to share or donate materials to an archive so students and researchers like me can learn from your lived experiences, please see me after service. I'd love to connect with you and help guide that process. So thank you so much, Bethel AME, for your time. You stayed with me through all over 100 slides. God bless you.
Well, Bethel, we have had a slightly different experience this morning as Pastor Naye prepared us for, one wherein we can actually see in our own times the Word of God in action through these churches, through churches that come from our own history in particular. So with that, let me open the doors of the church right now to see if indeed anyone is so inspired to come and join Bethel and make Bethel your church home, or otherwise who desires prayer or who wants to just come and to reconnect, reassociate. The doors of the church are open. We have indeed been challenged this morning, again, with words, photos, with evidence of what we have done. So inspiring for that which we can do. If I can just take a quick moment to say, when it comes to young Mr. Bowie, his mother was a couple years behind me in school, and she has gone on to establish herself in our community as a very successful architect. I could go on and talk about females in architecture, let alone African Americans in architecture, and certainly another great colleague is here. Actually, I should say two in that sense, business owners and very active in our community. And if I remember correctly, Brother and Sister Burton, AMEs? AMEs, formerly at least, AME. So Brother Bowie's mother, Sandra Little, and Karen Anita Davis Burton worked on that project that came here that was referenced also in the presentation as they were looking at the contributions of African American architects here across the state of Michigan and establishing that work. Again, church, we can be inspired by so much, and it is so key to understand that these things are right here around us. And all it takes is for the enemy to cover them up so that we don't even know the history that we walk by every day. We don't realize the proximity that we as individuals, that we as Bethelites, we as AMEs, we as part of the African American church community here, or just the church community, period, how we are connected and what we do, what we've done, and the power thereof. I'm going to stop. I am really inspired to see what this young man has done as I've watched him and as he's come up on me in different situations, surprised me over at Hartford, downtown at the Coleman Young Municipal Center, and now, of course, here to present this seminal work. With that, Pastor Naye, let me pass the mic back to you. I'll exit my privilege.